Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. Today, Jennifer and I will be having an affair with Juan Jose Arreola and his short story, The Switchman. Well, he is a new author to us, Juan Jose Arreola, so I wanted to give us a little bit of biographical information so that we can get to know him and see who we're going to be talking about today. So, Juan Jose Arreola was born in 1918. He actually died in 2001. So not that long ago. Well, I guess it was a long time ago now. I feel like it. He was a Mexican writer, an academic, an actor whose innovative work left a lasting impact on the 20th century Latin American literature. Known for his mastery of short stories, epigrams, and sketches, Areola blended realism with fantasy, exploring existential and absurdist themes, certainly in this story. Though less recognized internationally than contemporaries like Jorge Luis Borges, my boy, and his influence shaped a generation of Mexican writers through his use of magical realism, satire, and allegory. Key works like Confabulario, this book, which I have, which was published in 1952, and his only novel, The Fair, in 1963, showcases his wit, linguistic playfulness, and critique of modern society. Ariela grew up in a large family and faced economic hardships, working as a bookbinder before moving to Mexico City in 1936. There he studied theater and immersed himself in the cultural scene. His early writings, such as Varia Invención, that's what I'm going to say, hinted at his unique style, blending reality with the fantastical. Fellowship took him to Paris, where he engaged with European artists, further enriching his literary vision. Upon returning to Mexico, he co-founded the journal Pan with Juan Rulfo and Antonio Alatorre, cementing his role in Mexico's literary renaissance. Areola's legacy endures as a pioneer of experimental literature. His hybrid essay stories, like The Switchman, critique social absurdities with dark humor, echoing Kafka and Borges. Beyond writing, he prompted Mexican culture through television and teaching, mentoring future writers. Though his fame remained largely national, his works continue to inspire for their creativity, depth, and ability to distill profound ideas into concise, imaginative forms. Areola remains a cornerstone of Mexican letters, celebrated for expanding the possibilities of storytelling. What's funny is that a lot of famous writers end up being really famous for letter writing as well. I don't know why. I guess they're just good at writing. Did you have any other biographical information you wanted to share about him?
No, Joey, I appreciate that we are reading a Mexican author. I don't think we have
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of experience in this space before. I had not heard of this particular writer before reading the story, and I really did enjoy that. But it did, as you said in the intro, it is absurdist. There's a lot of ridiculousness that happens in the story that feels like it's social commentary. So I was like, all right, I want to know more about your background because this is clearly a story about the society in which you live. And I really appreciated
Mm-hmm.
that multi-layered approach. So I was not surprised when you said he was a letter writer, he's a novelist, he's a short storyist, he's also an actor, right? These guys seem to have many channels for expression. So I also think that's just really interesting when we think about what else are people doing. I think we talked about a writer last week who transitioned from being a writer and a short story person to becoming a cabaret performer in her 70s and 80s. So, I
Mm-hmm.
think all the world's a stage when you decide that you want to become a writer. So I just really appreciated that about his background.
Yeah, they always have interesting lives. It must be nice. It must be nice. And I just wanted, I think it's fun when sometimes we say like, oh, what was happening in 1958 when this story was written? So NASA was founded, it was established. That's pretty cool. The Beatles had their first recording session. Good things were coming down there. And the first surface crossing of Antarctica, apparently. Okay, so let's get into the story and I'll give a summary. This is a very short story. It's only 4 pages long. And you can read the story for free if you want to go to our website at extraliteraryfairs.com. There will be a link. You just press a little button that says read the story and it will take you right to the PDF.
And Joey, can
So,
I say something about that before you go any further?
yes.
You have to go read the story just for the graphic illustrations that are in that
Hmm.
PDF. I was like, that was an unexpected treat. I don't know where that came from, but it was really whimsical and added to the story. So it's a visual for sure. So stop by the website and check it out.
Why, that's funny because this book, his book here of his short stories, is also illustrated. So I wonder if that was just something that it didn't, I don't remember reading anything about him being an artist and he didn't draw those things in here. It's by another artist, but It's interesting that there's illustrations in his work. But all right, anyway. Okay, so now the summary of the Switchman. So a traveler arrives at a deserted station, desperate to reach T, the city name is just called T, by tomorrow. An old Switchman explains the country's absurd railways. Trains rarely follow schedules, tickets are sold for phantom routes, and passengers endure endless chaotic journeys. He recounts the tales of missing rails, stranded travelers forming towns, and trains that create illusions to pacify riders. The traveler insists his ticket guarantees passage, but the switchman warns of spies, false stations, and the futility of expecting order. As a distant train whistle sounds, the switchman vanishes, leaving only his lantern flickering between the rails. The traveler, now disoriented, shouts X instead of T, as it as if reality itself has shifted. The story satirizes bureaucratic absurdity and human helplessness in irrational systems where arrival is never certain. The traveler's hope persists, even as the system mocks his faith in logic and destination. That's a pretty good summary. It's pretty short, so that makes sense. Okay, Jennifer, why don't you start with telling us what you thought about this story?
So I wasn't quite sure what to expect from this story. It started out really well for me because I could find a little bit of this beautiful image that he says, like the tracks just kind of fade out into the horizon. I'm like, okay, I get where we're going. This is going to be great. And then I was like, I hate to use the train metaphor, but I'm like, Joey, this story just went off the rails for me because I was like, what in the world? Why is this absurd? Why is there so much that doesn't make sense? There's so much in my mind, like this philosophical view of it's not the destination that matters. It's the fact that you actually got on the train. And it was just all of this sort of a little bit of playfulness, a little bit of absurdity, a little bit of perhaps magical realism, because at one point they're like, oh, here's an important part that we forgot to tell you as the people who are creating this worldview for you. We didn't build tracks that go over this huge canyon, and we don't want to disappoint people. So we're just going to not tell them. We're going to give them a pep talk. And like, if everybody works together, we will jump this huge chasm. It's going to be awesome. Do not worry. It will be great. And we find out in the story that they're like, okay, gives them the sales pitch. They get to the spot where there's a huge chasm and they're like, let's deconstruct the train. Like, let's just take it apart. We'll carry it down on our backs. We'll go past the raging river that's at the bottom of the gully that we didn't tell you about, come up the next side, and then we will carry on with the train. And for me, I'm just like, everyone knows that does not happen. That is definitely a parable for something. So I appreciated the playfulness of that, but I also was getting a little bit lost in the details of, wait, I know this is supposed to represent a larger society and there are more things going on here than the simple story. And the magical bit where the guy shows the little lantern and kind of runs down the tracks and then he just poof, magically disappears. So I appreciated that magical, fantastical part of the story, but I'm like, there has to be a lot more to it than I'm seeing on my first read.
Yeah, I think it's an enjoyable read if you just want to read it at the surface level, which we basically say every every single time. But I think yeah, this requires more thought. What I really loved about this story is that I imagined if Kafka and Borges had written a story together, if that was a possibility, this is what the outcome probably would have been because there's so much of both of them in it. So it's no surprise that he is associated with with their writing. And this is certainly a Kafka-esque story. Like this is like almost this is probably the definition of Kafka-esque, which I will give us the definition. We have defined it before, but how many people will remember that? So Kafkaesque refers to situations that are confusing, frightening, and involve complicated official rules and systems that do not seem to make any sense. Which I mean, that's exactly this. There's a lot of weird stuff.
And it's all the bureaucracy. They're like, hey, the only reason this exists is because we created these rules. And don't ask to change the rules. You don't have to understand the rules. We're just going to tell
Mhm.
you what the rules are. And so that, thank you for reminding us of what a Kafka-esque story is like. It's like, oh, right, the systems that are in place will make no system and seem arbitrary and completely counterintuitive to what a good system would look like.
Yeah, and I can see the inspiration from Borges. Well, I'm sure he was inspired by Borges. Who isn't? If you read his work, you're like, wow, well, I aspire to be this. So I was reading some literary criticism on this story because I felt the same where it's like there's something I'm like I like this story, but I feel like I can't see what's going on. Like there's something I'm missing that I want to find out about. So I will cite all I read two academic literary criticisms, but one of them was called Areolas the Switchman, The Train and the Desert Experience by Bettina Knapp from the City University of New York. And in it, she said that Areola's style is elliptic and condensed. His economy of words suggests but never describes, which I felt like is a sort of a Borges thing to do, is to like basically beat around the bush and not give us all of that information. Like when we read The Library of Babel, there was so much information that he left out intentionally, and we were like, "Well, what is going on here? Where did these people come from? How do they eat? What are all these really basic necessities coming? Where are they coming from?" And he does this, Ariola does the same thing in this story. So we'll get into that. I was about to go on a tangent, but we're not there yet. And yeah, the same thing, like, I was like, what is the details behind like the train being taken apart? The engineer is like, here's how we're going to take it apart. Everyone put it on your back as if it's not going to be super heavy. And we're going to cross this chasm. But guess what? There's also a river at the bottom. So now we have to also cross the river. And then the government was like, well, this is cool. And we're spending less money. We have to build this bridge. So we're just going to do this for every time we have to travel here. And we'll just give people like a discount. And so there's like this really funny, hyperbolic, like mythic quality to this. And he does write fairy tales as well, Ariola. So, and that's what's in this collection. There's some of those in this collection. It's like about each different animals, which I haven't read them all yet, but so I'm not surprised that there's sort of this almost sort of like fairy tale quality to this story. But overall, I really liked it, and I'm excited to keep. I was reading some more of his work today, so I'm excited to keep going.
That's great, Joey. And as you were talking about the details of the government and the train station and how all of this was managed and how my word for that is discombobulating. As I was reading this, I'm like, wait a minute, none of this stuff makes sense. I mean, it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. And I think Ariola has done a great job of giving us that same feeling that the characters in the story, you can't rely on anything to be as it
Hmm.
should be. You're a little confused. Does it matter what the story is about? Does it matter how it's written? It does, but it doesn't because it's still an enjoyable ride. And again, we are dealing with a translation from the original Spanish, and neither you nor I have the Spanish language in our repertoire. So I'm
I can
also
read some Spanish. Like there was something I was trying to read in Spanish, so I could get through some of
awesome,
it.
awesome, Joey. It reminded me of my Argentinian friends telling a story in their storytelling style. So I did appreciate the story was like, okay, well, I'm telling you a story about the train, but what I'm really telling you about is a dysfunctional government system. But what I'm really talking to you about is the people who allow this system and who live into this system and who want this system to be true. I just really appreciated it was a story within a story within a story. And the more you looked into it, you could see that this was not what it appeared to be. And then those absurdist things, as you said, of the names of the stations changed, that they said that they did such a great job of printing all the timetables, even though they didn't make any of the routes that actually have trains on them. But you have a
Hmm.
book, and if it's in the book, it has to happen, right, Joey? It's like, well, if it's written down, it has to be true. Like, why would we make a timetable for a train that doesn't exist? Very good question. And that reminded me of Voorhees from the Library of Babel and all of and the Aleph, like everything in the world can be known at one moment, but not really, but from only one little tiny stair step in someone's basement. Like it was just a lot of leaps of imagination. And I did appreciate that. But it's also, as you know, my style is like, what are people feeling? What did they learn? How did they grow? How does this change me from reading it? And I was like, yeah, that wasn't the point of this story to get to know these characters as individuals. They were very represented of something else. They're not true individual characters that we got to know on any level.
Yeah, that's why it also reminds me of Borges, because we're not really supposed to connect to these characters and feel like, I mean, he's called the stranger, the main character. We're never supposed to get to know. He's always supposed to be a stranger. I mean, he's only supposed to be like this fleeting character that just comes and goes as the train hopefully will come. And by the end, it does. Or at least we think it does. Who knows what happens in the end? It could be ambiguous. But it's funny that you were saying like we can't really sort of pinpoint anything that's sort of going on. And there's some fun stuff that I think he does with time in particular that I think would be fun to talk about. But I was reading this, the other literary art criticism that I was reading is called The Switchman by Juan Jose Arreola through the lens of the uncertainty principle by Jesus Mendoza from the Autonomous University of Chihuahua in Mexico. That's a ton. That was a lot. Okay. But anyway, he was using economics to explain the story or parts of the story. And I was like, wow, that's so fascinating. I never thought of that. So he was saying the Heisenberg principle, never heard of it. Okay. The Heisenberg principle is from physics, and it says that observing something changes it, like how measuring a particle messes with its speed, basically. I'm dead. That's like the stupidest way for me to explain it, but I'm stupid in physics. Okay. And so it made me think of like, well, if he wasn't, and maybe this is a conspiracy theory, if his attention wasn't brought to the fact that this train may never come, would the train have actually arrived? Could he actually reach his destination if he didn't know that there could be false stations along the way, or that he could be tricked into thinking that the train is continuously moving? And so I thought that was like a super interesting way to interpret this story because then the switchman himself sort of acts as the interventionist in this. And I was like, again, I'm going down a rabbit hole, which makes me feel like I'm reading Borges because that's exactly what I do when I read his stuff. And if that's the case, if he's intervening, is this then divine intervention? And is the switchman sort of explaining the stranger's fate to him? And that could go down a long way. But I think again that sort of underlines like this is a very sort of Borges-esque story. Not that they're the same writer, but that the interest of the story is in the topics and the themes and like exploring that, which is sort of different to what typically are drawn to reading, where it's like we can connect to these characters. Like Ken Liu is one that we read recently that we're both devastated by the emotion of that. And there's not really a ton of emotion in this story.
No, Joey. And if there was an emotion, I'm not sure on the, the wheel of emotion of authorized emotions people are actually having that are not judgments. I would say I was exasperated. What was the emotion that came up for me? It was just like frustration of not understanding and the loss of hope because the guy's like, I have a plan. I bought a ticket. I need to be there tomorrow. Like, what do you mean the train is not coming? Like, I saw the schedule. I paid the money. I'm here on time with my baggage. What do you mean it may never come? And if it comes, it may take me to a different city. And I think that was like the metaphor of life. It doesn't matter how much you plan for something, life is going to show up. You're either going to get on or you're going to wait for something better. And you could be waiting at that station forever because he talks about the people who get on the train and realize they're not going to the city that they thought they were going to. Sometimes they trick them and say, like, hey, everybody, some great waterfalls over here. You want to get off and take a look? And we're like, oh, yeah, that sounds great. And then they just leave them behind. Like he talked about that on several occasions that these colonies were established because they tricked people into getting off the train. And for
Hmm.
me, it felt a little bit like science fiction. And I know you're gonna be like, really? And I was like, yes, like, hey, we're gonna go explore a new planet. Hey, we're kind of tired of you guys, so we're gonna be like, hey, look over there. And then we're just leaving you behind because he literally said, like, you could
Hmm.
hear the train pulling away. And they're like, wait, okay, I guess we live here now. And he did talk about the successfulness of those enclaves that grew up in that way. So that made me curious about, well, what's the history of Mexico City? What is the history of the indigenous people who were there before? They also had throughout the country, as I understand it, on the East Coast near Cancun and all of that stuff over there, that they have the temples, they have these societies that flourished and then they vanished. And everyone's like, how did they do that? Where did the people go? I don't know. And that's what came up for me as I was reading the story, but more specifically with the illustrations that were accompanying the story. He has these very Mexican themed sort of ceremonial masks and the things that I in my mind's eye, see the inscriptions, the hieroglyphics that are on these South American and Mexican, Latin American temples. So I don't know, Joey, that was just a very interesting thing for me to think like, what is he really trying to tell us? What time frame is he working on? Ancient, in the future, current? Don't know.
Well, it's funny that you say that because in one of those literary criticisms by Bettina Knapp, she was talking about how he is inspired by Aztec heritage and brings that into his story. So it's obviously he nailed it. I mean, other than with the illustration, that was pretty on the nose. But she wrote that Areola avails himself of the same illusionless outlook in the Switchman in order to satirize modern technological society with its false values, superficial and complacent attitudes, arbitrary views of human condition, and domination of humankind by the machine is a fitting sequel to his ancient heritage. So I think it makes sense. And I think there's stuff that he does with time and how Aztec heritage conceptualized time, as in it was not something that was linear and flowed continuously. It was something that was marked by events and it was like a divine mystery is what she called it. Time was a divine mystery is what she wrote. So I think it's funny that that is coming up because apparently he was very inspired by that. And I can definitely see how this was a satire for technological advances. If this was written in 1958, okay, so now we know that NASA was established. Hopefully that's true. But they obviously have plenty of other technology at this time. They don't have iPhones, no Apple, but they do have other things. So it's funny that like things are supposed to be getting more convenient for society and it's just making it harder to live in some cases, which is contemporary for now. Like I live in New Jersey and NJ Transit is notorious for being late. That's the train system in New Jersey that it like goes into New York, whatever. And it's late or delayed or it's canceled for there is literally a bowl on the train station and on the train tracks. Like this was like there should be no farms. There's no farms around there. But anyway, so it's just funny that that's something that they were so focused on that this country in particular was famous, he wrote, for their trains, but the trains were not even complete. The railroads, some of them were just marked with chalk, or there was only one half.
And Joey, that's so interesting because when you said that about New Jersey Transit, I'm like, yes, livestock does not belong on the train tracks. That is probably
Hmm.
something we can agree with. But when he brought us to this train system that they're so proud of, they're like, our country is known for this amazing train system. Like, just let me tell you how great it is. And as he wrote in the story, yeah, sometimes there's not even actual train tracks made out of metal. We just draw them on the ground, like with chalk, and you can just use your imagination. And it was like, okay, so these trains, in my mind, just when you said that, became these mythical creatures, right? They are magic trains. They
Hmm.
can jump the laws of physics. They appear or disappear, but they didn't. What I loved about this story, Joey, because I'm like, what in the world? Because I do not know this history and this time stamp from the 1950s in Mexico. What was culturally going on with them? Because they were very much talking about the hope people had for the future, and they didn't want any tiny little hamlets or burgs to be left out. Everybody gets equal opportunity to be on a train line because the train line in this case is kind of imaginary. It is a construct in our
Yeah.
head of what could happen. But then occasionally, like, I believe he saw the red light of a train coming and he was going to get on it. And as you said, the last line, he's like, hey, remind me what city you're going to. And he talked about the T, like the city that starts with a T. And again, that was very Kafkaesque and very Russian for me, that it's like, oh, they never tell you the whole name of something. They just give you the first initial and like a line. It's like, oh, people. Okay.
Hmm.
So I'm like, he's going to Toledo in my mind, and that's not even a place, but that's where he's going. And at the end, he's like, remind me, which train do you need? And he's like, I'm going to X. I'm like, now we all know that's not true because you've told us T like 6 times in the story. You didn't want to go to F because he said, hey, F's a really great town too. So again, that absurdity, that messing around with us of the people trying to pay attention and make the story coherent. I'm like, guess what? The point of the story is that nothing makes sense.
Yeah. And that life doesn't make sense. But I wanted to go back to what you were talking about with the people of this country. And it might not be Mexico. He never names it. It could be, it's probably fictitious. It doesn't really, the country itself doesn't matter, I guess, in this case for this story because it was never actually going to be real. Trains cannot just drive across the pavement and be completely fine and still get somewhere. But I just want to read this little these few sentences about the fame of this country. So this country is famous for its railroads, as you know. Up to now, it's been impossible to organize them properly, but great progress has been made in publishing timetables and issuing tickets. Railroad guides include and link all the towns in the country. They sell tickets for even the smallest and most remote villages. Now, all that is needed is for the trains to follow what the guide indicate and really pass by the stations. The inhabitants of the country hope this will happen. Meanwhile, they accept the service's irregularities and their patriotism keeps them from showing any displeasure. And to me, that was a really strange bit to add. And obviously, everything is intentional in this story. It's very short. I don't think there's any filler. It's hilarious that they literally thought of what time is this train going to come up? But we didn't actually build stations or railroads. That's hilarious. But what I was not expecting was the public reaction to this because there's his sense of nationalism is sort of like a red flag in my mind, at least. And maybe that's because I'm from the United States and we have different perspectives on things. Obviously, everybody has different ideas how things should work. But to me, it was like they would rather be quiet to maintain the illusion that their country should be famous for their railroads, although they do not function. And it made me think of like fascist countries like North Korea, where you could have figures like the Switchman who is sort of perpetuating propaganda about the country, but he's also not because he's being very honest about it. So it made me, I was like, I can't make up my mind. I don't know if this is like, this Switchman is promoting propaganda for this country or like, why are the citizens so ready to like die on this hill? I don't know.
So, Jerry, as you were talking about that, I'm like, oh, something unlocked for me. It's like, this sounds like religion to me, an
Mm,
organized religion that we have all the rules. We have a sketch. This is how the world works. It is not based in reality. They're like, okay, we have all of these trains and we're all going to believe the trains are coming, but we all know in our heart of hearts, in our physical lived reality, the train doesn't come because it doesn't exist. And it only sporadically comes, and some of them exist, but everybody thinks they're going to get a ride on the train. And I just think that is a very interesting thing if we thought about like the history of religion. You are given a book that spells out the rules of the road. This is how the world works. This is how you participate. This is what's the good stuff. This is the bad stuff. These are the consequences. These are the rewards. Because he does even mention in this story one of the enclaves that they said, hey, be very careful because there are spies and people on the train who might try to trick you to get off. The devil, Satan, right? Like tricksters kind of get you there. I'm
mm.
like, well, that's interesting. And he even said, wouldn't you love to get off the train with a bunch of young ladies and start your own thing? So for me, it was like in the Muslim religion, I believe that there is their idea of heaven is every man will be given X number of virgins waiting for him on the other side. So for me, that was like
Hmm.
a little nod to that universal, not a specifically tied to a particular religious ideology. But your reward is like, wouldn't it be great to like get off the train and start a new world with all of these young women who will be willing to create this world with you? So, Joey, just as you were talking, it's like, what is this about? What's this society? I'm like, oh, what else do we have? This like a long rule book that doesn't make sense when you look at it, but everybody
Yeah.
agrees to it. And if you don't, you're going to be called bad names and you're not part of the club. So even though it doesn't make sense, you can hope it makes sense. And you're just going to be like, okay, well, just because I didn't see the train doesn't mean there's not a train there, Joey. Just because I didn't see it. Today, it wasn't my day.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Even though I said like, what if he is what if the Switchman himself is divine intervention? When I think of that, because I'm not a religious person, I always think of like the Sisters of Fate from Greek myth. So my mind will never actually go to like Christianity or any of those religions. But that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, I could definitely see how this could be interpreted as the train and this experience is all faith based and it's just that's it. You have to believe that the train will come, that you're going to get to your destination, and it will happen. And I mean, it's now that I am thinking about it through that lens, it's almost like the Switchman is sort of trying to sell religion to this stranger, and it's sort of proselytizing then because he says they have this. I mean, the whole thing's a conversation, but in this part of the conversation, they say, "Will that train take me to tea?" And the switchman says, "Why do you insist that it has to be tea? You should be satisfied if you get on it. Once on the train, your life will indeed take on some direction. What difference does it make whether it's tea or not?" So, to me, now that takes on a different flavor of like, what if he's trying to sell a type of faith and not just like he's trying to cover up the lackluster
Bureaucracy.
bureaucracy. Yes, thank you.
You're
Can't say
welcome.
that word. So yeah, that's a good idea. I like that interpretation.
But Joey, it for me was not that he was necessarily selling him on the religion. He was just challenging the idea that we as individuals get to decide what our fate is. It's like you just get on the train and the train's going to handle the rest. And I don't want you complaining that you had a different idea about it. And that was what the Switchmen was for me. So kind of when we were talking, is that divine intervention or is that the pragmatism of you don't know what's going to happen. Why don't you just see what happens? Give up your plans, have faith that whatever happens is what's supposed to happen to you, right? And you
Hmm.
will adjust and thrive in this new environment. So, in some ways, it was hopeful, like, yeah, I'm resilient. If I end up in the jungle with, 65 other chicks and we're building a society, not going to be my favorite society building, but I'll get through it, that it's the possibility that fate is moving you in a direction that you cannot control. And it doesn't matter how many things you wrote down or how many tickets you bought or all the quote unquote reassurances that you were going to get to your destination. It's like that probably isn't going to happen and you're going to have to live with it. And so for me, that just really took on a large significance of can you let go? Can you enjoy the experience? Can you allow life to be what life is instead of you thinking you're your own God, your own controller of your destiny, because maybe you're not in control of much.
That's true, because he does change his mind in the end. He wants to go to a new city, whether he forgot it or not. I'm not sure. I think the ending especially can be interpreted in lots of different ways. But now that I'm like looking back at all the sections I highlighted and thinking like, what if this is religion? Now I see this as sort of like a more sinister story. And in particular, this one section where he says, okay, let me give some context. The switchman is talking about how the train sometimes doesn't actually move, but the government basically set it up so it looks like you're constantly moving, and you could, I guess, imagine that there's screens out there that are showing you some type of scenery. So anyway, he says the management does all this with the wholesome purpose of reducing the passengers' anxiety and as far as possible the sensations of moving. The hope is that one day the passengers will capitulate to fate, give themselves into the hands of an omnipotent management, and no longer care to know where they are going or where they have come from. And so you can really still interpret this in both ways. It's like a fascist government or a religion, some type of organized religion. Pick whichever one you like. Because we have both entities that are going to try and soothe their constituents or their citizens' anxieties by sort of giving them false hope. Because these are things that both organizations will absolutely do is say, don't look outside, like it's fine. Like don't worry about that. Like we're just gonna give you this hope that something will, it's fine. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't look behind the screen. So yeah, it's funny how now I feel like I have to reread this story now and think of it completely differently.
And what's funny for me about that, Joey, is that when I read the story, I read it a couple times today to be prepared for our conversation. It never occurred to me this was religious, not for
Wow.
1 second. So
Real time.
it's the organic bubbling up of something that you said. I was like, wait a minute, Joey. Something just became really clear to me here. But I did appreciate And when you were saying it's like, oh, they said don't look too much out the windows, just see how it's feeling in your body. Like, do you feel the train moving? If you think it's moving, it's moving. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like the Back to the Future ride at Orlando Universal Studios from 1990 when I was there or something. Like it just feels very, very much like, yeah, it's like it happened, but it was all an illusion and you didn't go anywhere, but you're sure you did, but you didn't. And I just think that was a very interesting. Obviously, they did not have those types of technologies in 1958 when this was written, but he's
Yeah,
like,
no
yeah,
DeLoreans yet.
there were no DeLoreans. It was pre-DeLorean, if you can believe
Yeah.
that there was even a time when we didn't have that amazing piece of machinery. That it was just a very interesting thing to think about the lulling of the masses and like what do you feel on a train? You get that like rocking like a baby. Like they said they made the motion of the train to give the, and I love the illusion of progress. It's like if you think you're moving, but then you find out you didn't, how does that feel? And will you also be like, no, 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 no. I was not tricked. Like we were in this car moving for like 6 hours. So if I look out the window now, I am sure I'm going to see something totally different. And it goes back to when you were talking about the Heidegger principle of being observed and that it actually changes reality by watching of something actually changes what is happening. That the observation or the questioning, again, to me, this feels like a very religious thing, the questioning of your faith will either strengthen it and underscore that faith is faith. I can't prove it. That's the whole job of faith. Or does it blow it up to say that I, upon scrutiny, cannot reconcile reality with this story I have been told? And now I'm in a crisis. And for me, it's the switchman, right? Like, it's like, why is it called the switchman? We don't talk about switching tracks, switching trains. Like, what is this guy's real job other than being like a tiny little man with an itsy bitsy? I love that he said it looked like a toy
Yeah.
lantern. I was like, well, how effective is your signaling going to be if you can't see the signal? And it's like, oh, right. When you're on an imaginary train, you can kind of have whatever size equipment you want because it's really not consequential to how that machinery works.
I just now I feel like I definitely got to reread it. I don't know that that Ariola was religious or was trying to write religion, but it doesn't matter because his opinion doesn't matter anymore. And we can interpret it however we want, but it is really fascinating to think about it that way. And I really like as I was reading more literary criticism about this story in particular, and the idea of like how Aztec tradition conceptualized time, it made me think that like okay, so time then has to be relative. So like he is the switchman in the beginning says like, "Oh, don't worry about the train. Just stay for a month or so whatever, but like charge your pay for by the month because you'll get better benefits from it." And so then I was thinking like, well, if this is sort of like if we're applying that logic of the Aztec time concept of time, then is the train up forever going to be on time? And then I was like, did I do drugs and then start thinking about things? Because I was like, wait a minute. If I have to go, if I get to the train station, right, and it's supposed to be there at like, I don't know, 6:04 p.m., because that's what time it is right now. But it doesn't come until 8:04. I'm not late. The train is late. So I'm still on time, but the train's not on time. And I was like, I definitely don't do drugs, but I feel like I am at this moment. But yeah, I think there's so many fun little like thought experiments that you can do with this story, and I would assume with other pieces of his work, just like you could do with Borges, where you could just like think of the most absurd things, but it like also works because it's an absurd story.
He opens that door for us. And Joy, I just want to read one little snippet of this that makes me think again about what is this really about? So the stranger and the switchman are the only ones having dialogue. So the stranger says, but once on the train, your troubles are over. The stranger says, but once on the train, aren't your troubles over? And the switchman says, relatively speaking, yes. But I recommend that you watch the stations very carefully. You might think you had arrived at T, and it would only be an illusion. In order to regulate life on board the overcrowded coaches, the management has been obliged to take certain expedient measures. There are stations that are for appearances only. They have been built right in the jungle and they bear the name of some important city. but you just need to pay a little attention to see through the deceit. They are like stage sets, and the people on them are stuffed with sawdust. These dummies easily betray the ravages of bad weather, but sometimes they are a near perfect image of reality. Their faces bear the signs of an infinite weariness. So I'm like, that's some beautiful writing and some beautiful imagery of there's a system in place in this world building. And when we were talking about this, Joey, I was like, oh, right, this feels like science fiction about the authors we have been reading who tell us what their world is like, right? He built this world for us out of
Hmm.
thin air, right? And it seems like the government also built this world for us out of thin air in this story, but reminding us that illusions are easy to accept as fact unless you take the time to look a little bit more closely. And I think that is a beautiful point in the story and a beautiful point specifically for this time in which we are currently living in, which is, 70 some years after this story was written. It is easy enough to be lulled and to look at appearances and be like, oh my gosh, look at this amazing city that just sprouted up in the middle of nowhere. It's like, oh, wait, if you look, you'll see their faces are all eroded because they've been sitting out there as dummies. And the dummies, the non-thinking, the not having a soul, the not thinking, like there's just a lot of layers to that. So I'm impressed with the story because it brought so much up, but it was a little frustrating to me upon the first couple readings because I was like, none of this makes sense. Why can't you make sense? It's like, welcome to life.
If you don't know what you're getting into, you're just like, what is going on? Why is this guy not telling him when the train is at? Like when I first read it, I was just like thinking like, oh my God, this is so frustrating. Why is this guy not telling this stranger when the train is coming? It's very simple. You work here, you should be able to tell him. And then by the time I got to the end, I was like, oh, okay, that was not the purpose. It was the anticipation of the train that is coming and not it actually arriving. But
And
there was
Joey,
one.
sorry to interrupt you there.
Mhm.
The stranger does ask the switchman. He's like, "Do you work here?" He's like, "Actually, I'm retired. I just come
Mhm.
here to like watch the scene every now and then." So I also thought that was a very interesting thing of like, "Hey, don't blame me. I don't actually work here." It's like, "Well, what are you doing here waving your switchman stuff around?" It's like, "Oh, I'm just here to observe how you guys are all taking it in."
And the switchman is shocked at the end, or at least I thought he was shocked when the train actually comes up. Because at the very end it says, the little old fellow winked and smiling kindly continued to gaze roguishly at the traveler. At that moment a faint whistle was heard. The switchman jumped all upset and began to make ridiculous wild signals with his lantern. It seems like he's kind of like, "Oh, I didn't know it was gonna happen," and then he like runs towards it, and then obviously it says that he dissolves into it. So was he really there? We don't know.
And Joey, just when you were reading that section, I flash back to the time many years ago. I was in Notre Dame Cathedral and I saw the priest swinging the incense. It was
Mm.
lit up like a candle on these huge chains. And it was just kind of that rocking motion. And it was red and it was lit up. And that was the image that came into my mind. And it was very mythical and it was very powerful to be in that space with all of those people believing in this moment. That's what came up for me when the switchman has his red light there and he's like, oh my gosh, you mean this is real? Like, I knew the train was never coming and I manifested this train to appear. And he's like, uh-oh. Yeah, it was just such an open-ended wild ride of like you can take that anywhere you want, but I just thought the swinging red light and the sound, the faint sound of the whistle of the train coming towards you, it's like we didn't all have a mass hallucination, did we, that was happening? Don't know.
Yeah, I mean, who I don't know who the switchman is in the end. Then, if he's retired, does he mean retired like he died retired? He retired from life, because who just dissolves? But then we can't really take this as like a reliable story because obviously you can't take apart a train with your bare hands and carry it across a chasm and then a river, as we said. So obviously we can't take it at surface level here, but it's an odd ending, and especially because the traveler or the stranger as he is now called at that point, which also suggests like this train is probably there because if they're switching the name from the stranger to the traveler, that he's probably going to be traveling, hopefully. Or maybe he has faith that now he will actually be traveling and now he has changed it for himself. Who knows? Could be that. But it's strange that the name changes, as you talked about in the beginning. It goes from the letter T to the letter X. And in the criticism by Mendoza, he was saying that T in the beginning could stand for time. This man is very logical, and he thinks like, I bought a ticket. I arrived on time. This is what's going to happen. This is how the world works. And then as he is made aware of what is happening, he says like X as in like it's a variable. He doesn't know where he's going to go now. But it could be that. I don't know. Who could say?
I love
Go ahead.
that because if we read where it says X answered traveler, again, that name change is curious.
Hmm.
At that moment, the little old man dissolved in the clear morning, but the red speck of his lantern kept on running and leaping imprudently between the rails to meet the train. In the distant landscape, the train was noisily approaching. And that took me to the Polar Express, a wonderful thing that more people on this podcast can probably have a lived experience of watching the guys on the train on the Polar Express.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Because it's always the red lantern and it's like it's magical and it's like, but we hear like I am hearing that train. I am seeing it come on the landscape. Like I am now a believer in this train is going to take this guy somewhere new.
And as you were just rereading that, for whatever reason, I guess I just made myself believe that it was a foggy day and that's why he disappeared. But that is not what that says. It says that it was a clear morning. The little old man dissolved in the clear morning. So there's no way. I don't, so that doesn't make any sense. This whole time I was like, oh no, it was a foggy. In my head, I was imagining this scene as a foggy day, and it's not. So again, what does that even mean? Like,
Well, it's
is
a
he a
good,
ghost?
yeah, it's a good question, Joey, because I'm like, I'm with you. It's like, oh, well, the only time people disappear in front of your eyes is like a thing of fog comes in and you just kind of like step aside and then you're magically gone. And it's like, nope, he said, clear morning, sun is shining, there 1 minute, there you're not. And then I was like, dissolved again. This is a question of translation. Did he really dissolve? Or did he quote unquote disappear? Because if I ran down the tracks, like running and all you see is my lantern, I, Jennifer Smith, disappeared, but you did still see the lantern. So I just wonder if that word dissolved is the direct Spanish to English translation of that sensation, or if it's more of a disappearing word that this translator chose to call dissolved. Don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. It could be like the translator's decision to use this English word is maybe more ambiguous than the original text. I don't know. That's something we could definitely look up though.
But I would love to have at that moment the little old man disappeared in the clear morning. That works for me. I don't know how he did it,
I
but
mean,
magic's magic.
I'm sitting here thinking like, well, what was he wearing? Because we don't really know what he was wearing, but maybe he was far enough that his clothing and body sort of dissolved into the background and the scenery of whatever. Maybe there's like mountains, or I think it's in a desert, or it's like in a dry area, so maybe there's a lot of just natural colors around, and he dissolved into that, and the only thing that's still illuminated and easy to pinpoint is the very bright red lantern. I don't know,
And Joy,
but it
one of
has
the
us
things,
thinking.
yeah, and one of the things I appreciate about this story, it does feel timeless, right? You know, locomotives were in the 1860s, right? All the way up until last week. There are people using train technology. So in this story, I couldn't get a clear sense of it did tell us at the end of the story that this was written in 1958, but for me, this could have been 1980. This could have been, 1990s when I was still writing on steam-powered trains and things. So I just appreciated that about this particular story. And I think we've read several stories that even though they were written in the 50s, it was very hard to pinpoint that in time. I think modern writers that we have read put a lot of like, oh, I'm just going to look that up on my iPhone, or oh, I was
Mhm.
listening to Jazzy Jeff or something like they'll just put in some little cultural timestamp that we're like, oh, okay, I know exactly when that story was written. And this did not feel that way to me. It was such a wide range of times it could have been. I couldn't nail it down. And if it is true, what you told us has been said about this author, really having that Aztecian sense of time, that maybe this time is just a big looping circle and it doesn't matter if it was 1950 or 1928 or 1840. It's the moral is the same.
Yeah, that's true that a lot of really great works of literature end up being timeless. Like there's literally you cannot pinpoint the time as you were saying, but also that they are relevant forever. Both things. And that's interesting that that's sort of like a mark of great literature is for it to be timeless in both ways, that it's still relevant to us, but it's also something that could just happen at pretty much any time. This could still happen today. What if you don't have service at this random isolated train station? You're like, "Ugh, I gotta ask someone now," and that's the worst thing you can do is have to talk to somebody IRL. So yeah, I think I agree that this is definitely timeless in both ways, in that it will forever work, I think, unless trains are no longer a thing one day.
And the trains are still running. When I was back in rural Michigan, I was driving with my friend's father, and he was like, "Hey, look right there." And I looked down the train tracks, and you could see the red and green lights. He's like, "A train is going to be coming because the lights change." And I was like, "How do you know these things?" And it's like, "Well, he's been around on the trains a long time." So I think this technology of using various color lights, even though we're so technologically savvy, we're still using this age-old technology. And I thought that was really, really interesting out in the
I
middle of
mean,
nowhere.
we use it for cars, so
Mhm.
still works.
Still works. So, Joey, we're going to go on another journey next week. What are we going to be discussing? And hopefully, it'll be more straightforward for me than this very ambiguous story, which I'm so grateful to you for bringing this into our conversation. And I think, as you said, it deserves a reread because I think as a result of our conversation, I have some other things I want to contemplate and see where the story takes me.
So next week you're going to be reading Los Angeles by Ling Ma, that is included in her 2022 short story collection Bliss Montage. But this story was also available on Granada Magazine. So if you would like to read that for free, you could just visit our website extraliteraryfairs.com, and we will have that link all set for you.
Great, Joey. I look forward to talking to you and seeing you in Los Angeles.